One individual lost his father, and he was in the middle of an exorcism. This is all baloney, is what he said in his mind. He didn't even say it. And the demoniac snapped to attention and spoke in perfect Malay, called him by name, and said, "I was there when your father passed away. And I was the one that made him pull the trigger." Shapeshifted right in front of him and scared Albert Bender to death, and he shut all of his research down. And this man, who was 6'4", parapsychologist for 40 years, found on the floor in the fetal position, crying uncontrollably. Only thing he could say was, "They were here, they were here, they were here." If you keep this up, you're going to get a terminal illness. It's going to look like it was natural, but we want you to know it was us. If you don't stop, we're going to remove you. Coming out of his chest, "Give me your soul." We just want you to know that our guide said that they'll be waiting for you when you die. He said, we could feel this just pervasive darkness. He goes, I never want to feel anything like it. Again, multiple voices in unison, and one voice spoke to them and said, bow down before us and come with us. So, my name is Nathaniel Gillis. I'm an international lecturer, author, and researcher. My center work right now is surrounding necronetics, the self-replication of species, and what I have termed the ritual doctrine of non-corporeal conception. So, basically, to break that down is if there were an expertise that I have, it would be incubi literature and hybridism throughout history. So my latest research I've been doing here for the last 5 years is connecting the UFO abduction phenomenon with hybridism, but more so with an emphasis on the occult. And so what I've been doing is collecting cases where bio-sigilization has occurred, where alleged extraterrestrials were observed carving sigils into the skin of experiencers. So that's really what I'm researching at the moment, and I'm working on a trilogy of necronetics, which is the first installation would be called The Skin That Crawls, which will emphasize the nature of hybridism with the context of possession and pregnancy being in the same case studies at the same time. So in short, I believe we're dealing with a singular intelligence that's been incarnating as various archetypes throughout history. And I and others that I'm currently working with are learning how to push beyond the masks, see beyond the archetypes, and focus our attention on all of the underlying pathologies. So that's who I am, and that's why I'm here, my friend. So for the last decade or so, I kind of went through a pilgrimage of literature. I went through various mythologies of the phenomenon, trying to understand if there was some kind of unifying factor between the folklore. And so I started out studying the origins of the Nephilim and the Rephaim of Genesis 6. And so I went through Chuck Messler and Dr. Michael Heiser's research. And then I started getting into hybridism in Jewish mythology. And that's when I realized that whatever we were dealing with it's not just horns and hooves, it's not just ghosts, but it's something way beneath the surface that does and has always had a singular common pathology. And that pathology is ritual magic. In every folklore, every legend, I came across sigilizations on the experiencers that should not be there. Case in point. So in the incubi literature, there was always an argument within demonology, right? Were these entities, incubi spirits, were they demons themselves? Are they horns and hooves? Are they fallen angels? Are they apparitional in nature? The problem with that model, and again, it's a model I inherited, right? You know that, my friend. I inherited. The problem with that model is that when Father Sinostrari was collecting these cases and going in and doing in-home investigations, he realized that not only were these beings leaving secretions on the experiencers, that they were also sigilizing their bodies. And so the secretions they were discovering, and I'm talking about being within an hour from the entity manifesting in their rooms, now women specifically, they're having secretions and excretions left on their bodies. And I do air quotes, because we're going to knock this, nail this out, knock it out of the park, and hopefully demonstrate that it's not what we're dealing with. But they weren't spirits, essentially. And that was what they didn't understand, was how could a spirit secrete a substance? I'm not talking about ectoplasm. I'm talking about literally the insemination of female victims with a fetus. How does that happen if this is an incorporeal entity like we were taught to believe? And so the reason behind demonologists arguing versus a devil or a practitioner, they didn't understand it, because on one hand, they knew they had sigils in the skin of the victim, so that does seem to be demonic and spiritual. But on the other hand, they also have secretions left on the body, to the extent, my friend, that these women were becoming impregnated by these alleged spirits. And so that's when I started looking at this through an objective lens. I've grown up, especially in the religious circle, so I know all of the arguments. But at the same time, I knew that there's something going on beyond the veil and underneath the surface. The pathology is quite literally chaos magic. It's not an accident. It's not a figment of our imagination. Whatever these beings were had bodies, number one, and number two, they were carving their own sigils underneath the eyelids of their victims. Now, that's when I started to take an occult approach. I'm not an occultist, right? Everybody who knows me knows that. But I do, as a researcher, like to take different approaches to what I'm studying, because I know that I've hit my head on the wall before trying to look at this through a certain lens, not realizing that, again, there's something deeper occurring. And so what I came to was that, yes, this was somewhat of a practitioner and one that was embodied. And the sigilization accompanied the moment of conception. The moment of insemination, that's when the sigilization occurred, and the practitioner focused his intent on the iconography he's carving into the experiencer. And so that's the incubus throughout literature. Now, another problem that I ran into in my research, and it was just it boggled my mind, was that we have this kind of linguistic implication. So we know this entity has a body. We know that there is some form of necromancy occurring because the secretions, right? They were taken by Father Sinistrari of Amino, a Franciscan priest, and by another researcher, Montague Summers. But both of them, their conclusion was that whatever this entity was must have been possessing a dying body, a corpse, or it's his own body and he was dying. And so before his act of death, his goal was to replicate his own self by inseminating a woman, carving his sigils underneath her eyelids, and then implanting his consciousness into that fetus as his own biological avatar. So that was the theory. It took me a while to get to that point, but that is the initial theory. My point here was that the reason Montague Summers and Father Sinistrari had such a problem with this model is because the secretions that they were looking at looked to have came from a dead person. And so they thought, right, that this was some form of necromancy. Furthermore, that the intent of the sigils behind the eyelids of the experiencer was almost like a branding mechanism on the part of the practitioner, so that even after she died, he could scour around and find his sigils on the body after she had been long deceased. That was their working hypothesis. And so that's why I came up with a new field of research that other researchers are coming under. It's fascinating. And it's called necronetics. It's a combination of genetics and necromancy, because the evidence that is pattern confirming suggests that we're dealing with occultists, initiates, who are still embodied and are still alive in the earth today. Now, dealing with sigilization, it's a very profound point. See, sigilization should stay within the context of demonology and the occult. If our model of extraterrestrials is in fact extraterrestrial, then we should not be finding the same sigilizations on UFO abductees. And yet, the same occult practices that were being performed in antiquity and in demonology are now being performed on alleged experiencers of UFO abduction. I'm currently working on a case, and it's with family members of an experiencer who was working with the late Dr. Carla Turner. I'm speaking with the son, and he reached out to me, and he's like, Nathaniel, I would like to relay my experiences and also my mother's, of course. And so we're starting to talk about the data set, right? Like, what did you encounter? And he gets very comfortable with me, and he says, Nathaniel, he said that my mother was being taken by these entities. And he said that like we lived in the same city as Dr. Turner did. He's like, so Dr. Turner would go through her issues with the phenomenon, but she would also stop by our house for a cup of coffee at nighttime. And he's like, I would just be a fly on the wall listening to what they're going through and everything that they're experiencing. He said, now, what's interesting, Nathaniel, he said that whenever the phenomenon would manifest in my house, he said it would usually show up as a plasma field of corpuscular balls of light flashing on and off, and it would just kind of ascend and descend in the living room. He said there was one night, he said that my mother is sleeping. My father and I are watching a movie, and he said out of the corner of our eye, we see it slipping silently, just moving like a shadow into the living room. He said, on the outside to my father and I, it looked like just corpuscular balls of light, plasma, right, just moving. He said that it slowly descended down upon my mother. He said my mother would wake up a few hours later telling us, I was abducted by aliens. There's a key point here. Both of them experienced the phenomenon differently at the same time. The second point, the most profound data point here, is that when the phenomenon was done with her, she was covered, quote, head to toe in sigils.
Whoa.
They took the mother to the hospital. The ER doctor is examining the iconography. His advice to them was, I don't know what this is. I've never seen this before. Here's a heated blanket. Now go home and hopefully, and this is a profound point, hopefully the burns, these were sigils, but they were burned into her. Hopefully these sigils will go away and she will stop hurting. There's a problem here because both of them, again, the father, the son, and the mother, they experienced the phenomenon differently. And this gets to my point in the explanation of why there is a common pathology throughout the literature, hybridism, occult ritual, right? All of it. Why it is that you can have all of these archetypes, but singular pathologies, or what I've called behavioral patterns in my lectures, that are the membrane, as our friend Joshua Cutchin calls it, that links them all together, that puts us within the position of saying, okay, there is a there. Early researchers were not losing their minds, that there was some form of ritual magic occurring, and that these entities themselves are seemingly initiates of a secret order. Why is it, again, that we have experiencers seeing different aspects of the phenomenon at the same time? Now, this was first observed, or at least to my knowledge, first mentioned in Dr. Carla Turner's book, Another Experiencer, when she was dealing with a family who was on a highway and they looked around and they saw this hovering UFO, for the old school peeps like me, hovering directly over their vehicle on the highway. Now, 5 or 6 other cars stopped, but other cars around them keep on going. Now, 5 out of the 6 people, I believe, saw the craft. But even the people that saw the craft could never agree on what shape it was or what color it was. So something was present, but none of them could really get a handle on what it was. So this is another common pathology with the phenomenon, is that the phenomenon seeks to be seen when it wants to incarnate an archetype. What's that mean, Nathaniel? What that means is there's a difference, and this is just my perspective as a researcher, there's a difference between when the phenomenon manifests and when it incarnates. Manifestation is when it's present. You'll see it from the peripheral. But when it locks on your gaze, I call it baiting your gaze, it will create a conscious connection with you. And by seeking to be seen by us as observers, the theory I'm working on now is that it will weaponize the observer effect. For those who are familiar with that, it's in quantum mechanics. If you observe the phenomenon or quantify it, measure it, just by observing it, you've thus changed the phenomenon that's being observed. And so the theory I'm working on that I will soon validate here when I get to my mega point is that the phenomenon has the ability to bait our gaze. And what's happening when we have multiple witnesses looking at the same entity, but they're all seeing it differently, what's happening is by triggering the observer effect, it's baiting our gaze. We look at it, and we, by observing it, collapse various forms of the same entity. Now, it's through that weaponization of the observer effect that we have the archetypal presence of the gray, of the ghost, of the demon, of the ancestor, and dare I say, of the guide. This is why, in my research, Necronetics, this is why you have hybridism everywhere, not just in one measure of folklore, not in just one legend or mythology. It's everywhere. And yet when you go to different parts of the country, they'll say this is what it looked like. Not what this is, right? It's not that it did something different. It's that it appeared different to the observer. And so the base note, at least from my perspective, of the phenomenon is that there is some sort of ritual or ceremonial magic occurring to experiencers. It's not a theory. It's documented. And so now what I'm looking at in my own research and others that I'm working with is who are they? What rituals are they performing? And do we have the ability to push back outside of just knowing what they're doing? All of this and all of the hard work that I've been doing throughout the years culminated in a lecture that I gave last year at the Awakening Conference in Manchester, England. So in that lecture, I talk about another case of sigilization that occurred that will really help us understand where we are at with the question. After giving the lecture, I talk about, this is fascinating, the sigilization of a remote viewer. This remote viewer had guides. There's your archetype. And he would leave his body at will, and it was an abduction by every measure. He's in a metallic room. They're flanking him on the left and right sides. And they had built such a rapport with this remote viewer in this, he's an experiencer as well. But they would give him insights and prophecies, my friend. They would tell him, like, hey, listen, there's this famous celebrity in your city or a famous politician, and you don't need to poll over here for your election. You need to poll over here. You're really hurting yourself in this area. And so this remote viewer had become a professional, right? He's making money, thousands of dollars doing this. And so, as it always has, this has happened over and over and over again, where the mask the phenomenon wears slips, and we make eye contact with a species that we still cannot even articulate. So here he is in his session. He's conversing with these entities, and he starts to realize that the physiognomy, the facial structure, the appearance is not holding together. Looks the part. They do. They look like they've always looked to him. Talk the same way. Everything, by all measures, these are his guides. It's only after a few minutes that he kind of told, he was talking to his son. His son gave me the account. But he said that, he's like, my dad put up a barrier in front of him. Like, what's going on here? I don't trust this situation anymore. I don't think that this is where I was supposed to be, and I don't think you are who I'm supposed to be with. Here is what we're dealing with, okay? The mask slips. They shape shift into some kind of unearthly entity. He's thrown back into his body, and when his son, who I'm good friends with, realized what was going on, his father, the remote viewer, is stumbling down the stairs, clutching his heart, white as a ghost, and he's crying. He's like, my dad was the toughest man I've ever met in my life. He was a veteran, right? He's like, he wouldn't cry for anything, you know? And he said what scared him as a child was seeing his dad cry for the first time. And he's inconsolable. He's out of breath. Well, he has a massive coronary, nearly dies. As they are assisting him at the hospital with their own eyes, doctors and the family witnessed sigilization occurring in real time. From underneath the skin to the surface, whatever these things were sigilized him with occult iconography. Underneath the skin to the surface. And so once I had that relationship with this son, I asked him over time, what did your father think he encountered? He's like, he said, I know after talking to him that it wasn't alien. It's like, okay. Did he have some kind of linguistic moniker at all? Anything? A description, perhaps? He said, yes, these were sorcerers. And that is it destroys at least the current model of them being extraterrestrial. That leads us into a question of what kind of magic was being performed on this individual. And is it possible that just like his situation was an abduction, that other abductions are in fact also connected to ritual magic, and that it's not an accident, my friend, that Dr. Carla Turner's case study was very similar, where when the abduction ends, you see the successful fulfillment of a ritual on that victim. And so I compiled all of that information into a lecture, and here I am in front of 500 people in England, sweating bullets, right? And I'm with people that all, and you said you're going to steal it. Okay. But, I'm surrounded by, okay. I was surrounded by PhDs, and I don't have PhD. I have ADHD. And my friends, it was debilitating that night. I am there, and just to be transparent with you, as soon as I get up there, right, it's been a 12-hour day, by the way. Got there at 8. It's like mouth goes dry instantly. Boom. I can't even speak, right? So anyways, fascinating time. My point here is, though, I'm able to speak to my heroes and people that have clearances with the government, multiple governments. They're parapsychologists, right? They're scientific men. I'm approaching, or at least I thought at that time, I'm approaching the phenomenon completely different, perspective, and hopefully I'll add value. That's when we sat down for a cup of coffee and we start to talk about the research being done. And I'm going to give you a phrase that was spoken to me. And again, these are not super religious men. These are men of the scientific method. But I was told, Nathaniel, we've come to the same conclusion. I said, what's the conclusion? And he said, they want to be worshipped. I said, can you break that down? Like, what makes you think that? Because I've learned to do that throughout the years, because I've met, researchers where you're like, yeah, you have to dig deeper for me. And so I said, okay, what would lead you to that conclusion? He said, well, we just wrapped up a season, or an episode rather, of Unsolved Mysteries. I said, that's fascinating, but I want to know more, like what's going on, congrats. I'll watch it. But I want to know more. And he said that when we're finishing up our filming one night, he said, we had an experiencer with us. We had all of our equipment there. We weren't capturing any phenomena, nothing, no manifestation. And he said it was cold. It was starting to drizzle outside. We were going to wrap it up. So we're literally like loading all of our equipment back up in the van. He said that's when the experiencer they're working with looks at him and says, they're here. And this gentleman goes, who's here, Don? They're here. And there was an eerie silence that just kind of draped over them, overshadowed the whole forest. all of the nature, all of the birds, all of the crickets, just gone, eerily silent. And from the darkness, I believe I told you one with multiple voices in unison, in one voice, spoke to them and said, bow down before us. He said, and that was creepy enough. He said, we could feel this just pervasive darkness. And he said, Nathaniel, I've done research for 40 years. He's like, I've never felt anything like this in my life. He goes, and I never want to feel anything like it again. He said, but it was a direct invitation. Bow down before us. And then on the tail end, and come with us. Go with us. Bow down. And then once you bow down, you're able to go with us. And so that's when the conversation shifted from, are we dealing with aliens? Are we dealing with grays? Or are we dealing with something that has incarnated these archetypes in order to diversify its identity in our eyes? Is it possible that even the demonic moniker is not enough to describe what these beings are? What kind of an entity would demand worship? I'll tell you what kind of an entity would demand worship. The same kind of an entity that would want an altar from the experiencer, Albert Bender. The same kind of entity that would want Jack Parsons to perform his ritual magic in order to get technological advancements. These appear, from my perspective and others that I've been working with, to be one and the same. The pathology is present. And perhaps a deeper proponent of this argument is that even the hybridism throughout history is performed through chaos magic. And so if we have that backdrop as some kind of context or theory at which to research the phenomenon, then we start checking all of the boxes. We may not know what they are, but we know they're practitioners because they practice ritual magic. And so that's really what necronetics is as a whole. It's not discovering new life. It's discovering an old life in a new way. And might I say that I'm not alone in this. You know, there are others that have come before me that have made these connections. And, you know, people email me, oh, you know, you're this, you're that. It's like, no, I stand on the shoulders of giants. But what I'm realizing is that even beyond the sigilization of experiencers and the subdermal manifestation of iconography, that there is a control matrix employed by whatever these things are. So I first heard of this by reading books and listening to lectures from Dr. Barbara Bartholic, who would help experiencers with their psychological trauma from their abductions. And she was threatened by these entities. Threatened. And you're due for an adjustment, she was told. And she started uncovering the same pathology, the identical pathology here, that there was a connection, a supernatural one. And dare I say, because people like to crucify me, dare I say a religious connotation to this. Again, not that these are horns and hooves, right, or spirits, but that there is a living species on the earth that are practitioners and they are abducting people. My point here, though, is when you get too close to the construct, they will initiate a self-protecting mechanism that can and has started out as mere threats. I've received them. Here's how it happens. Dr. Bartholic, abducted. You're due for an adjustment. So she carried that burden for a long time, my friend. She told coworkers, colleagues. They told me, they threatened me. Well, one day she gets into her car. It's Thanksgiving weekend. She's on her way with her husband to go to a Thanksgiving dinner. Out of nowhere, a man cuts her off, flips her car, ejects her husband. He hits the concrete, gone. She barely survives. She goes to Dr. Turner and says, Carla, because they were friends, Carla, this is what happened. I can't believe it. Goes to the whole story. Come to find out, Dr. Carla Turner was also threatened by the phenomenon. Not just you're due for an adjustment, but if you keep this up, right, you're going to get a terminal illness. It's going to look like it was natural, but we want you to know, like everybody else will believe it's natural, right? It'll be some aggressive breast cancer or something. But we want you to know, Dr. Turner, it was us. If you don't stop, we're going to remove you. Shortly afterwards, an aggressive cancer took Dr. Turner. So that's when I started realizing that whatever these are, they do not fit the demonic moniker. Here's why. They have seed. Spirits don't have seed. Even the ectoplasm thing, right? Still hairy for me, but they certainly can't replicate. Number 2, they must have bodies. Number 3, they can kill people. So what I heard growing up, right? Well, listen, they pulled out Job, right? Well, Job, there's this boundary, and that's not happening here. Okay. So those are 2 scientists, 2 researchers, rather. We're going to get to the scientists that were essentially taken out by the phenomenon because they made the same connections I've made today. Now, in 1972, here's getting back to the academic side of the field. There were several, like about a dozen or so scientists who also approached the phenomenon as though these were extraterrestrials and that it was just ufology, right? Materialist, secularist, scientific ufology. And yet, like I'm talking like a decade of research. And then when they would go to publish their thesis, right? The thesis would include, and we know this because they came out after their deaths, but their thesis was like, listen, my entire model of the phenomenon was obliterated. I was a materialist, physicist or whatever, a scientist. And I thought we were just dealing with, extraterrestrials and grays and Pleiadians. And then they would hit this barrier of supernaturality. And it was like, well, what is this? And so one by one, my friend, they would show up in a desert, deceased, and the phenomenon would let everybody believe that they were deceased at their own hands, if I can say that. Over and over again, just before they would release their thesis or publish their all of it. And I started looking at that and I'm thinking there's a problem here because what could cause this to happen to people, make it look like it's their own decision when their own family members, and there are some, my friend, that even told their wives, if I am found in this manner, you better know it wasn't me. It's what I've done, the research I'm doing that triggered the protective mechanism of the phenomenon. And now, I'm found deceased. There was one specific professor, his name was Professor Rene Hardy, who had came to similar conclusions. He, again, was a materialist, secularist, coming at this from purely a ufological lens and saying, you know what, I'm interested in this. But once he got down to the pattern confirming pathology, that's when the phenomenon was forced to remove its archetypal mask, and he made eye contact with the group of practitioners, initiates, and he also was found deceased. Now, his family had a different experience. His family knew. We already knew. He told us this might happen, right? We know he didn't do this to himself. But here's the paper published. And that's exactly what he had come to, was that there's something here, not there, something here that is interfering with certain researchers in what they're doing. So I want to lay the landscape. Picture this. They are at his funeral. They're all crying. They're obviously grieving over the loss. Everybody knows each other there. The colleagues of his at the college, university, his family members, and they're conversing, and they all sit down. But a hair before the funeral starts, the doors open up in the back, and 6 very, very tall, thin men in unison walk in together and sit down. Incredible. Now, they videotape these gentlemen. They photograph these gentlemen. They talk to these gentlemen. After the funeral, they get back together again as a family. Did anyone know who they were? No. They never even gave us their names. So they went back to the footage to see who they were. They were never even recorded. Not on the camera, not on video. So my point here is that there is a model that would obliterate the construct right now. It would destroy the religious. It would destroy the secular model. It would destroy the extraterrestrial. And that is, and this is just a theory, by the way, people are going to, well, Nathaniel said, it's just a theory I'm presenting. And that is that there is a species of initiates in the earth right now that are still performing ritual magic on experiencers under the guise of extraterrestrials. They are embodied. They are still hybridizing our species. They are replicating through wombs by virtue of chaos magic, in whatever we're dealing with, has the ability to walk in and out of reality. And if it wants to, this is going to be a heavy one, it can create physiological constructs to where you and I can talk to each other and you would have no idea that I'm not real. That is the model that I myself and others are appealing to a little bit, because we believe that there's pattern confirming evidence of that. Now, we can go into the observer effect, and then we can break down CE5. We can do whatever you want me to do. But I think that's at least a foundation.
You kind of grow up with this concept that, demons, what we know as basically disembodied Nephilim spirits are just that. There's no physical manifestation. There's no contact. But yet, right. Yeah, you're right. When you look at this stuff and you start seeing this stuff, like you said, there appears to be, I know this sounds so like sci-fi and like good to most people, but yeah, you're right. There's I don't know if it's a sect or a cabal or something, but like you said, a dare I say, interdimensional sorcerers, That's the only thing that fits. I know it's so crazy, but it's like, is it crazy because growing up, like we've been told that idea is so left field? And then I think about, the stuff I do, but I'm like, is it because I'm not diving deep and quote unquote exposing? Is it because it's such a shallow kind of like entertainment level? And I'm like, because people ask me this stuff all the time. They're like, have you ever been threatened? Have you ever had anything weird? No, but it's probably because of how like surface level the things you're talking about are people who are literally coming out and publicizing papers and like reports on like what we're talking about, making it very public, like, hey, before they get a little.
I was talking to Steve Murray about this the other day because I just did his show where it's like, in order to get anywhere, like to understand the phenomenon, and once you breach that barrier of being noticed, like I've done that. Steve and Barry have done that, right? Where like I was doing research in Mesopotamian demonology, and I got 2 emails from 2 different experiencers, of course, working with guides, right? We just want you to know that our guides said that they'll be waiting for you when you die. And so I'd have to like just cut all of my research out, all for at least a month. And I would go to Rhode Island for a week and just feast on Italian food and disconnect. But it's not just me, Steve and Barry were doing research on Babylonian demonology. And in the same night, the phenomenon manifested in their homes. Same night. Like when Steve woke up the next morning, Steve Mara, Barry's on his cell phone. Steve, we got to talk. Did you experience anything weird last night? And so my point, though, is you're right. And so like what others, like my colleagues and I have to do now is once we breach that barrier, in order to literally sometimes stay alive or just not be threatened, we have to get a little bit of information, pull it back, and not share it.
Yeah.
Right. And then bit by bit release it to the public, so it's survivable at least. But whatever we're dealing with, again, we're still trying to assess their abilities. And the problem I'm having now, my friend, is even when I start talking about this, people think I'm worshiping them or I'm performing demonology or some weird thing like that. I'm not. I'm simply educating the public on where we are at in the process. So I have determined in my research that, number one, I struggled for the longest time with vocabulary I needed to articulate the research I was doing. That's part of why I created Necronetics. And others, too, like I said before, are starting to come underneath that banner of research because they're like, I was studying that. I just didn't know it. This has been really refreshing. But my point here is that it's not just that they're present, that these entities are present, but there seems to be what I call a proto-intelligence. Something out there, an energy, a program of sorts, or some an intelligence is the only way I can explain it. But it has the ability to work with the practitioners or species thereof that I'm referring to. So why Montague Summers was also encountering these entities in homes. And he would be like, okay, like why is it that the same secretions that are being found on these experiencers, usually from recently deceased men, there are the same secretions that are being discovered in graveyards directly over freshly dug graves of, guess what, recently hung men. And so what he started doing was triangulating the phenomenon to where the grimoire itself, the ritual required certain secretions to be performed. And then that's where you find the phenomenon hovering, taking from the deceased and even, dare I say, cattle mutilations, taking that and then helping the practitioners facilitate their rituals. And so in essence, the suggestion I'm working with here is that, yes, these are embodied, they are practitioners, but there's an energy out there that's working with them. And this goes even back to kind of disclosure and ufology itself. Like even Albert Bender thought he was studying ufology, but he had built an altar in his attic. Again, and he's thinking, all right, these are extraterrestrials, and that's good because they're all benevolent, and my intentions with them will determine their intentions with me. So he built an altar for them and starts basically offering to them praises, worship, incense, whatever they liked. And so he was also researching, again, from a ufological perspective, but he realized that there were aspects of this that didn't fit that model at all. Why was it that these extraterrestrials would want an altar at all? Like, what is that? It's weird. And also, if these extraterrestrials just showed up in the 60s or 50s, as David Jacobs suggested, why is it that we have altars going back thousands of years? Mm-hmm. So it was this, right, cognitive dissonance in Albert Bender's mind. And so he came to a conclusion as well. It's the exact same conclusion a bunch of us are and have, that there's a supernatural element to this, and that there's a control mechanism tied to it. Or as my friend says, that there's a sting in the tail. So guess what he does? He writes a letter compiling all of his information. We've seen this pathology before. We've seen it happen. He mails it. And the same entities that manifested at Professor Renee Hardy's funeral show up at Albert Bender's doorstep. Like literally 60 years prior. Hi, Albert. Hands him the letter he mailed the day before. We got this. Absolutely. The implications are startling. We have this, and we want you to know we have it, and we know what's in it. We know your conclusions. So he's talking to them. While he's interfacing with these entities, one of them switches masks, just like the remote viewer I've worked with, right? This family changes person. I'm no longer human. I'm something completely different. Shapeshifted right in front of him and scared Albert Bender to death, and he shut all of his research down. So my point here is that the phenomenon is grooming practitioners, and that disclosure has already happened according to the correct model of the phenomenon. Disclosure is not when they land on the White House lawn, right? And I've said this in lectures in times past, where if our model of the phenomenon is wrong, then our time of disclosure is wrong too. And if their correct pathology is sacrifice and altar building, then disclosure is not going to happen, because disclosure has already happened, and it happened thousands of years ago. The only difference is, just like the observer effect, just like the phenomenon has always diversified its identity throughout history, we're telling ourselves those are something completely different than these new guys here in modernity. And yet the new guys, all of the same aspect, to the point where they demand to be worshipped.
That to me sounds 100% demonic. Yep. In the sense where it knows what the truth is, but it wants you to veer away.
Oh my goodness, my friend. So yes, so that's what I've been researching for the last few months. But let's get down to how the phenomenon has been able to maintain its identity. Hold on. Now I'm messing up. Now we got to get down to how this phenomenon has maintained its identity throughout history without compromising its influence, right? So early on, when I started working with experiencers, specifically doing in-home investigations, I'd ask them, like, what did the entity look like? And now we're getting down to the root system and the mechanics behind the deception employed. So I would hear things, and they were very common. Like, I had one case where the entity would crawl in bed with the husband and wife at nighttime and literally lay in between them, to where it looked like some invisible creature was pushing on the cushion in the bed, moving. Yeah, it was very, very strange. But I'd ask him, like, well, what did you see anything? Did you see anything? And so she would always tell me, I sometimes see these kids, or I'll hear kids laughing. And then at first, I thought it was a child. Come in my bed, get on my bed or something. And, no big deal. You're benevolent. And she's like, and next thing I know, it's not a child at all. It's something completely different. And it's playing with my hair at night, or it's whispering to me and stuff. And I realized that there was a unique pathology there as well, because what she was seeing from the peripheral vision wasn't the same thing she was seeing head on, which I mentioned this earlier. And then it was this kind of idea, and I know you've probably heard this before as well, especially talking with Mr. Cutchin and everything, where like when these experiencers are interfacing with these entities, that sometimes they get under this ghostly glare or this what they call conscious connection, and they're put into this deep sleep or slumber. And that was essentially what she was telling me. She's like, Nathaniel, it's like whenever this thing incarnates, I don't know what to do. It feels like a dream state. And so in my notes, I would always document that. Like, okay, here's a unique point. Next case would come, right? There's a unique point. I had another individual that told me her account. It was almost the same, but this actually included copulation with the entity, which I won't get you demonetized, so we're not going there, brother. But she said that, one evening she's laying in bed and she, again, peripheral vision, that's the manifestation. The incarnation will take place once, right? You're consciously connecting to it. And so it boom, 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 and all of a sudden she looks at it. And when she looks at it, before her brain could even understand what had happened, that phenomenon had triggered an archetype. Here I am. And of course, it was her husband. So something is happening simultaneously. She's observing it. It's creating an archetype, a mask, not like it's there, present. She's not creating the entity. She's just creating the mask it's wearing. And also the third prong is where she just starts to descend into a dreamlike, trance-like state. She said, we copulate. She said at the very end of it, next thing I know, he's on my side again. And I go to look back at him, but he's unable to hold his form. The physiognomy started to dissolve, started to fade. That's when simultaneously the stupor that it had induced her in begins to lift. And all of the memories that she had in the back of her head started flooding forward. She realizes to her utter astonishment, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. That's my husband. He's been next to me asleep the whole time. What was I thinking? I knew that. So then she goes to look and this thing switches. It kind of twists itself into a smoky apparition and flies out the hallway. But she said, Nathaniel, what I don't understand is that it put me into such a stupor, a trance, that I was forced to make decisions that I had no ability to, right? These weren't informed. This wasn't informed consent. She's like, next thing I know, I just did something with something, and I don't even know what that something is. Like, what is it? She's like, but I'll tell you one thing, that wasn't my husband. And so what I realized that there is entity-initiated contact that's occurring here. That was an entity-initiated contact. Manifestation, when it seeks to incarnate an archetype, it will seek to be seen. And people don't understand, which we're going to get to with the CE5 practice and all that. They don't understand that whatever these things are can induce us into brainwave states that we've never experienced outside of perhaps a demonic nightmare, to where we are like, oh, I'm questioning my life decisions. That's a no-no. I don't want anything to do with it. And I've known researchers personally who've experienced that, who've one specifically, his girlfriend told me he collapsed in the fetal position. He collapsed. Wow. He woke up, an entity was it was at the corner of his bed. Entity didn't touch him, didn't attack him, didn't say anything, didn't say, hey, listen, you this, you that, nothing like that. It was just looking at him. And this man, who was 6'4", parapsychologist for 40 years, found on the floor in the fetal position, crying uncontrollably. Only thing you could say was they were here. They were here. They were here. That's what we're talking about. And that's another issue that I have with people like, okay, just go throw holy water at it. Just to be transparent with you, I wish that was the case. I wish, right? We would not even be having this conversation. It would be like, okay, it's just like a migraine. Take a couple Tylenol and that's it. If it gets too bad, take an ibuprofen 800, call me in the morning. We're good. That's not what's happening. But to your point where it's like when you're interfacing with these entities, they have knowledge. They'll pull from an archive of knowledge, like secrets we've never shared, ever. And I think that's perhaps one of the more disturbing aspects of it, where it's like, it's not just the emotions you're projecting upon me. It's the fact that you're willing to share secrets I've never shared with anybody. And you don't care. You just want me to know, you know. Like one individual lost his father, and he was in the middle of an exorcism. And I'm going to sugarcoat this, but he and this guy was out there. This is all baloney, is what he said in his mind. He didn't even say it. In his mind, he thought, this is just baloney, and I don't believe in this phenomenon. Like, you're faking it, essentially. And the demoniac snapped to attention and spoke in perfect Malay, called him by name, and said, I was there when your father passed away. That would have been enough to, rocked his world. And the entity said, and I was the one that made him pull the trigger. And the researcher that told the story was at the Exeter Festival, I think, Paranormal Festival, and he's crying. He was just a little boy inside, just devastated. Like, how would you know that, first of all? Number two, why would you think, like, to use that against me? All I did was say I didn't believe that you were real. That's all I did, right? Even men. I talk trash a lot. I'm a football fan, man. I get in them threads, man. I'm like, you guys couldn't win a championship. You guys had to buy your team. I would never think, even to my worst enemies, oh, by the way, it's bad, but that's the kind of entities we're dealing with. My point, though, getting back to this aspect of the phenomenon having complete control over our perceptions of it, it has the ability, again, to have multiple witnesses and trigger the collapsing of its archetype to where it is the observer effect. And the theory that I'm proposing, I'm working with a couple other researchers on, is that when it wants to manifest, you won't even see it, when it wants to incarnate something, it will seek consciousness to do so. It will seek our gaze, just like the entities, something else, and then boom, here's the conscious connection. It'll go through the Rolodex of entities and archetypes and friends and husbands, and sometimes, like in one of my cases in India, a lover or 6 of them. Pick one and I'll wear that. And the whole point, though, is that the archetype itself is designed to moderate the experiencer's behavior. I have cases from Italy where these entities manifested to nuns in a convent as their favorite deceased confessors. They weren't priests. It was the phenomenon, right? Seeking conscious connection, using that as the observer effect, and then triggering an archetype from that person's mind. Of course, I'm your deceased husband. Of course, I'm your favorite priest. And then, as we've seen over and over again, and I'm going to get to this here in a second, when the phenomenon is done using that archetype or that interface event to do what it wants, and some of these are rituals, at the end, at the time of its choosing, it'll rip the mask off, like I've spoken about in other cases, and we are laid bare in front of an intelligence that stands outside of space-time, that has foreknowledge, tested in Project Doorway with Stephen Barry's research. They tested it. The phenomenon knew their future up to 12 months, down to the very minute of what they were going to be doing. Yeah, you're going to be at a conference. Oh, really? Oh, yeah, you'll be at a conference. When? It's in August. It'll be August. And oh, really? Right. Next day. Ding. So they either knew the conference was going on and they knew the invitation was coming, or they authored the invitation that was on its way. Right? Like, hey, I want you to invite these. I can picture a lot, so I gotta focus here. So my point here is that the phenomenon, again, when we interface with it, we're not fighting for minutes of control here with free will. We're fighting for mere seconds. So again, I contacted one of my mentors. I said, all right, I'm working on this observer theory, the observer effect. And I went through the same cases I went with you, right? Where it's like, okay, yeah, once it seeks the conscious connection, that's when you realize that it's trying to incarnate something. And it's trying to incarnate something through us as mortal portals. I said, what do you know about this? Instantly. Here's one of their experiments. They were working with CE5 practitioners. For those who aren't familiar with this, because I was as well, there used to be 4 levels of contact with the phenomenon, originally produced by J. Allen Hynek. And then later on, it was added the CE5, which was from Stephen Greer. But it's defined as, and here's the lie, a self-initiated contact. Self-initiated. The idea is that if I have pure intentions, then my pure intentions will determine the phenomenon's intentions with me, right? So I'm a pretty nice guy. If I walk up to Ted Bundy, I'm like, hey, Ted, you seem kind of cool too. I'm a very nice guy. Why don't you be a nice guy? Or Hannibal Lecter, for that matter. Hey, Hannibal, nice tie. I'm a very nice guy. Therefore, you got to be a very nice guy to me. And that's the philosophy. And I've never believed in it, by the way, just to be transparent. And so the idea is, okay, so they've got these practitioners of CE5, they're trained, and they have these brainwave monitoring units on their heads. And they say, okay, just at any point, tell us when you want to go initiate contact, because it's self-initiated, right? And so they say, okay, well, I got a thought. We're going to go initiate contact. And so they go to this undisclosed location. They go through the whole thing. And meanwhile, again, they're having this brainwave monitoring unit on their heads. And they're watching this. I think it was at nighttime. And all of a sudden, above their heads, the phenomenon incarnates. Triggered manifestation. It's there. And so the experiencer, again, love and light, benevolent. This is the best thing I've ever seen. Now everybody sees it. This is awesome. Interfacing with it. Conscious connection, right? But they were looking at the brain waves. This blew my mind, my friend. And within 20 seconds of the experiencer looking, the conscious connection being made and the phenomenon incarnating, there was 20 seconds before the phenomenon induced the experiencers into theta brainwave activity. Theta brainwave activity is what happens when we go into trances and we go to sleep or we daydream. It switched them into a mode to where they didn't even know they should. If what they were encountering was even real, or if it was just another lie produced, the theatrical production on the part of the phenomenon. Now I said, all right, we've got an answer. This is exactly what they've been doing in incubi literature going back thousands of years, where the interface with the entity, like I said, right? And then the slumber comes over them. The brain activity changes. And now they're underneath the auspices of an intelligence that could do whatever it wants to. It's that conscious connection. Now, what I'm presenting here is that it is not a self-initiated contact. That is assuming, right? To believe it's self-initiated is to assume the contact occurred out when the incarnation happened. Not the truth. The contact occurred when someone gave them the thought to go out and observe, pushing the head. Observe me. And by the phenomenon baiting our gaze and in wanting to be observed, right? It triggers the observer effect and it collapses itself into something that may or not be real. Is this making sense?
Yeah.
Okay, let's dive deeper. If that's true, then we would have evidence, not just that we have multiple experiencers witnessing different parts of an entity or, different sides of it, or, this looked like a gray, this looked like a demon. That is happening. But let's break it down scientifically. If that's true, then there must be a difference between what experiencers of CE5 and the phenomenon overall, a difference between what they're witnessing, right, during this interface event, what they're witnessing, and what's actually being caught on camera, right? So we're going to zoom into the pathology. Lloyd Auerbach was one of the very first parapsychologists that came to these conclusions. Not this conclusion, but this particular conclusion I'm going to give you. He had an investigation where they kept seeing this female apparition all the time. all the time. Same house, obviously, just walking around. There she is. And it's like, like researchers, they'll go 20 years without ever seeing an apparition. They'll do thousands of investigations, and it's boring most of the time. They're just drinking coffee, hoping something churns up. Here we go. Apparition triggers. So he thought, he's like, you know what? This is starting to get annoying. It's not interacting with us, but we're witnessing it. Let's go to the camera and see if we have it on film. So they do. You know what they found out? That the camera was not capturing the apparition. The camera was capturing an orb. They weren't seeing the orb. They were seeing the apparition.
Wow. And
so, right. So what they started doing was when the apparition appeared, where's the orb? That's when their research took a leap. That's when they started noticing that with apparitions, there was an orb somewhere around there that was projecting that physiological construct. I'm getting passionate now. Was projecting the physiological construct in their presence. And so this is, and Josh Kutch and I were talking about this the other day. Is it all lights? We don't know. We're just, researching. But the point is, the orb was present, and it projected an artificial construct of an entity, and people will have thought, I thought that was Deer and Edna. How about this? I thought that was Bigfoot. Not realizing that by observing it, what the phenomenon is doing, it's there, but it's projecting an archetype in front of you. And here's the problem we're having. And that archetype may not be real at all. And if it's not real, my friend, then we've never been studying aliens or ghosts. We've been studying lights.
Something that this is mind-blowing. So I had a chance to speak to, I don't know if you know who Mr. Timothy Alberino is.
Yeah.
We were discussing the topic, this was like a year ago, of Skinwalker Ranch and his hypothesis. And he was telling me this because he, in like a Skype call, got to talk to, I'm trying to think who the head is of that. Brilliant scientist.
Travis Taylor? Tom Kelleher.
I don't know. I'd have to go back and see. Anyway, the hypothesis that this scientist had also matched Timothy's. And so that's why Timothy was like, oh, tell me. Whatever is happening underneath that ranch is altering the perception of people who experience phenomena, seeing Bigfoot coming out of portals, UFOs, UAPs, balls of lightning, werewolf-like creatures. The list goes on and on. It's to the extent to where that multiple people can have the same hallucination without even realizing they're having the same. I don't want to say hallucination. I want to say altered perception because that's more accurate. That they're having. So whatever it is, whatever it has the ability to alter that perception. So the fact that you would mention that, maybe there's a lot more here that is altering our perception in terms of, all these accounts of all these unexplained phenomena, and that what people are seeing is just the mask, the avatar in which that decided to present itself. Why? I don't know. But it's really interesting to me how a lot of people have experiences that appear supernatural, and they display predatory and demonic attributes, feasting on fear, having the ability to kill you very easily, but they don't. They're not interested in that. And, being impervious to mortal weapons, gunshots, this and that, being gone in the blink of an eye. But it's like their sole purpose was to appear there to instill that in you for some reason. And then people talk about being marked. Well, that sounds like a spiritual thing to me. There's more going on underneath the table. I'm kind of like getting ahead of myself here, but everything that you and I talk about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your stance is basically, look, this whole sandbox idea of like what we know as demons, we've basically serial boxed this, and like it's not only is it much larger, but it's much worse than we could ever imagine. And this is me, so agree or disagree. You kind of go back to like the Watchers and like the 200 fallen angels, and you think of how absolutely intelligent, like to a startling degree. These are supernatural beings with very high. They were teaching mankind all sorts of stuff, and that's nothing new. And I know they had offspring, et cetera, say of the Nephilim. I wonder if there's any sort of connection. To what degree, I don't know. When you see these things manifest and you see these things reappear, the knowledge they have of your past, your future, everything about you, how they know everything about you, to your worst fears, to your greatest, I don't know, hopes and dreams, and they could appear in any way they want. It's almost as if they're on a mission. And in order to achieve that mission, they know that they needed to appear as XYZ at X, Y, and Z time in your life at X, Y, and Z place to achieve whatever that mission is. It's so much more, I guess I'll end on this, is that as I'm kind of having this revelation as I'm talking to you, it almost seems it's far more calculated than I guess I've ever realized. And again, from my background, my beliefs, everything that I know, people might ask, well, I don't understand what is the purpose of all this? Why? They want your soul.
It's consciousness seems to be a currency to them. Dr. Barry Taff had a case that I've never heard anybody talk about ever. And to my knowledge, he's only mentioned it one time, and it was on an old Art Bell interview on Coast to Coast AM, right? Mm-hmm. And so Dr. Barry Taff said they were dealing with a man who claimed that he had a guide or was in contact with something. And they're in his house talking to him, and he goes into this trance. And it was full-on possession, but it wasn't crawling up the wall backwards or puking up pea soup. I bet you at the end of the night, they would have rather that have occurred than what did, because this man collapses on his desk. His mouth's not moving. This is the weirdest thing I've ever heard. And I had a case like that as a murder case where, you know, the murderer, like the mouth wasn't moving and a different gender was embodying it was crazy. So I've had that, but I've never had what I'm going to tell you is, anyways, the voice that was coming out of him was very raspy, but it was a guttural coming out of his chest, and it was slow. Give me your soul. Just like that. And he said, after, like, we're watching him do this, and this, we're trying to communicate with this entity, and all it's wanting is our souls. And as it's crazy, he said, but at the end of the night, this man went from having black hair to complete white. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It had completely just sucked all of the energy out of that human being. And Barry Taff was like, yeah, it didn't want anything else. It just wanted our souls. And that's that is a disturbing aspect, because I have friends, like I have one researcher that he was big time. He used to research with Paulino back in the day in New England. But he was like, you know, Nathaniel, he goes, have you ever heard my origin story? And I'm like, I don't think I have. He's like, well, I've never told it. He's like, so you can share it, but don't put my name on it. So it's like, okay, fine. But he's like, you know, I got into the field. He goes, I do cleansings, you know. He goes, some of the most malevolent hauntings, they've called upon me. And he goes, I show up when priests don't go and are unsuccessful. They come to me. And he's like, so I deal with a lot of parasitism in the phenomenon. And I said, okay, like, what happened to you? And he's like a lot of us, you know. He started out very, very young. He was targeted by the phenomenon. But he said, Nathaniel, he said, I was like 6 years old. And he said, I was a very sickly child. And he goes, I was constantly staying home from school. It's like I couldn't eat, and I was just very, very sick. He's like, I'm better now. He's like, but it was just a very, very bad time of my life. Anyways, he goes, one night, he goes, I was sick again in my room. My mom, you know, just puts me down to bed. And I'm just laying there thinking, man, I wish I could be like all the other kids and healthy. He's like, but all of a sudden, I'm out of my body. He's like, I can't explain it. It's never happened since. He goes, but I'm hovering directly over my body that's in bed. He said, and that's when I noticed that there was something in the corner of my room watching me. He said, so I'm freaking out because I'm looking at this small, like, humanoid about his size, just staring at him from the corner of the room. And he goes, I look down at my body. I look back up at him. I look down at my body, and I look back up, and he's gone. Where'd he go? He said, that's when I look back down at my body, and now my body's moving without me being in it. And he said, that's when, he said, this buzzing or chatter kind of voice or something came out of my body. And he goes, it's not me, Nathaniel. Something is like working my vocal cords, right? He said, and that's when, he said, whatever was in me, he said, that was the entity. That was his conclusion. The entity had commandeered my body. He said, now I'm looking down at it thinking, how am I going to get back in it? And what's going on here? And that's when the entity lifted his own eyes at him. And he said, now I'm staring directly into my own eyes. Blew my mind. But that's his origin story. So then we kind of like, it's a whole other show perhaps. Then it's like, okay, what is possession? You know, why is it? You mentioned this earlier, where if they could kill us, why wouldn't they? Right?
Yeah.
If the Catholic model of, well, they hate us, they want us all dead, actually stood true, why don't they? It's because there's a symbiotic relationship here, right? To your point about they'll trigger fear and then feed on it. And that's not a theory. I've witnessed it in my own life when I was a child, where it would induce me into a looping nightmare, and it wouldn't let me wake up. It would be the same nightmare. And then when I woke up, it would kind of heighten the trauma, and I could feel it feeding off of me. And I'm thinking, what is going on here? But I do believe that's also why people get it messed up. Like, well, if these things are such a threat, you know, you've heard that weak argument too. If there's such a threat, they'd wipe us all out. And it's like, well, I like steak, right? But it doesn't mean I'm going to go kill all the steak, you know, all the cows. Like, I kind of want another one, and that helps me survive.
What about? I like what you said about the symbiotic thing. I know you've talked about it before. Mm-hmm. Have you ever thought about, in addition to that there might be spiritual rules and laws in place that keep them from doing whatever they want to anybody, that they have to ask permission to, you know, be able to do what they need to do. And they're only allowed to do so many things, you know, why, we don't know. Right. But from my understanding, and I know you too, because you're very knowledgeable, there has to be, and this far supersedes any human understanding, that there has to be some sort of spiritual set of laws and rules in place of who can do what and where and why.
I've had some indication of rules. You know, there was an incubus case in the 16th century where it was a virgin, two virgins, allegedly, you know how that is, according to their own testimonies. They got married. And after the honeymoon, like, they're still on vacation, but after the initial consummation, woman goes to bed, incubus, dream demon manifests to her. She never had any paranormal experiences before that. Now it's knocking on her door saying, hey, listen, right? And now it's trying to copulate with her. And she's like, well, I just got married. You can't be my husband. It was this very strange scenario. But people get this wrong about incubi entities too, where it's not just impregnation, it's possession that they're after. And so this entity possessed her. And when they're interrogating the entity, the being inside, the exorcist asks, like, well, why did you choose her? And why did you choose her now?
Right.
And he said, and if we can take him by his word, you know, at his word, that's fine. But he said, we are forbidden to touch this woman until she had been touched already. And once it was consummated. Look at that kind of serial killer. Like, what? Yeah, like, wow. We were forbidden to touch her until after she was touched. And now that she's been touched, I'm here. And so this gets back into other cases I've had where trauma preceded, specifically sexual trauma, preceded incubi entities. I had one case where this is during COVID lockdown. Family calls me like 1 a.m. They're friends of my family, and what's going on? And they're like, well, our daughter is in the ER. They won't let us in, but she's having gastrointestinal issues. And like, we don't know like what's going on. Well, we can call it God. We can call it whatever. I don't know what to call it, but I had a vision. And I told the parents, I said, I think something very traumatic in a very bad way has happened to her. And I said, you know, and I've never been to your house, but I said, you have a chair, a fireplace, and right next to that, there's a couch. And I said, in about 2 weeks, when she gets out, sit her down and explain to her, you know, we feel like something traumatic has happened to you and that this has opened a door for paranormal activity, because that's what all this was about. She was having paranormal activity, right? Nightmares. That's to the point, my friend, where she wasn't seeking help, didn't know who to talk to. So the trauma started moving inward. And so now she's having panic attacks and stomach issues, and now she's in the hospital. So long story short, she gets out of the hospital, goes, sits down with the parents. Sure enough, she went to a college party a couple years before and got pulled into a room. Bad things happened to her. 2 months later, she has a nightmare and an entity shows up. Oh, hello. And the most unique pathology here, and this is the same thing, it's all throughout the incubi literature, is that the actual man that did the act, his bravado, the way he smelled, his build was identical to the entity that incarnated in her nightmare. And she's like, well, I don't understand what's going on. And so what we nailed it down to that entity had possessed the man to create a trauma in that girl's life, to open up a portal to where the other entity will show up on the other side. The same entity, different way, different method, shows up in her nightmare, right? And I can't touch you till you've been touched. Now that you've been touched, here I am. Let's do this. And so and so it was literally like, it was really bad stuff. But long story short, she got therapy for that, closed that mortal portal, entities never heard from again. And but it's trauma, and I'm afraid that a lot of these experiencers, as traumatic as the rituals are that have been performed on them, it's almost like it deepens that connection with the hijacker effect, not the hitchhiker, because that implies consent.
Why?
I don't know. I have no idea. I just know that it's crazy.
There's been there are some occult rituals that involve inflicting as much psychological, physical. They're kind of the same thing, really. You know, I was going to say emotional, but it all trauma to the victim to implant a spirit. Yep. You know, I know that everything you're saying again is just confirming that, but it makes me wonder why spiritually. Why does a person? Is it because they're in such a vulnerable state that they're weak? Like why that? Why in that moment of complete agony or whatever, you know, the peak of their trauma, that implant, you know, I don't know.
Well, I know why. Well, I know why they're doing it during sleep states. I mean, it's not just the manipulation of the perception. It's the literally grooming of the experiencer that's taking place. Do this, say this, consent to this. And not just that, but and this is some of the older traditions where when you're put into that dreamlike state, your soul is elevated. It's vulnerable, right? So you're literally you're not just hijacking, but you're distracting the body to extract the soul. And then a lot of these are being performed, I believe, 100% on the soul. It's like the remote viewer. He was out of body. And when he's back in his body from underneath the skin, that's a whole different level, my friend. Like, it's like, wait a hot second, what's actually going on here? And so that's why I believe that a lot of this is on the soulish dimension first. So then the methodology would be soul first, skin second, which now, again, right, the pathology is the same. Boom, now we're back into hauntings, where I've had pictures sent to me of a malevolent haunting. It was a mother and daughter. And she's like, Nathaniel, I don't understand this. You're the first person I've heard talk about it. She goes, but we were in a haunted house that we used to own. And both my daughter and I, here, again, burning sensations on our bodies. And then from underneath the skin to the surface, scratches. And so a lot of this may be happening in the soulish spiritual dimension. And because we're mistaking, you know, it's showed up on the skin, we're not realizing that it's soul first, skin second. That would mean that the sigilization, by the way, would be sigilized souls and then sigilized skin second. And again, that kind of points us in the direction of, do we have the ability to quantify what that is that could do that? Because horns and hooves doesn't cut it for me. Like it's accurate. I'm not saying that, at least the source of it. But we've got to throw away the archetypes. Right? Because the flood is just overflowing the banks here. And we have to be intellectually honest enough to say, yeah, that's not it. There's something deeper, more profound, and more meaningful occurring.
They seem to really, whatever these beings are, they seem to really, really hate the human image. And what I mean by that is, you know, people, again, this is my beliefs, that people really try to like detach it from a biblical sense, but it always, there seems to be a thing with the blood. And it's almost like they hate anyone and anything from that blood, from you know, the creation. And they despise it so much that they are willing to do anything as organized and militant as it is to dismantle and to take it down and anyone down. You know, you look at Genesis and, you know, you look at, you know, when it talks, you know, in the garden and it talks about serpent. Well, you know, if you look, serpent didn't mean snake. It meant, you know, shining one. Right. And it's interesting that, you know, when God condemns Satan at the time, you know, that's, you know, you're going to crawl on your belly for the rest of the days of your life. What do you mean? Like, what was he doing before? There were things going on pre-flood regardless of what anyone believes, there were things going on pre-flood that I think would completely blow people's minds away. And that it wasn't the sandbox, Adam and Eve, the snake in the apple, you know, man fell. And it's like, when people look at it that way, it does sound fictitious and like a fairy tale. But if you only knew, and this is involving like ancient cultures and the things mankind was taught, you know, you have the Watchers and the Fallen and just everything that happens, I think people couldn't handle it. I don't think people would be able to handle it. And anyway, I say all this because it ties in directly what we're talking about, that there seems to be a movement, and I think they know their time is short. Yeah,
it's deep research, and I'm very blessed, you know, like the contacts I've made, and I know a lot of people, man, but they weren't, it's like they were teaching me what I already knew. And it was like, you know, bumping my head up against the wall. It's like, okay, I need something material that I can latch on to say, okay, this is, because I knew what I was studying was accurate, at least some of it. I don't claim to know it all. That's kind of foolish.
Right. No, none of us do.
But I had a conversation not too long ago with somebody who's in ufology, and multiple people, in fact. And here's the idea, is that ufology is a front. It's just the exact model of Albert Bender's experience, where at the end of it, it was, oh my God, I'm being initiated into something. Yes, you are. And you don't understand what it is. Once you get in it, you'll see things, hear things. It'll destroy your model, obliterate your construct. But now you're in it, right? And you don't know how to get out. But that is essentially necronetics. That's what we talked about, at least my research end of it is necronetics, the ritual doctrine of non-corporeal conception. Because believe it or not, all of the pathologies, the phenomenon is demonstrated, even in ufology, all the archetypes, the conscious connection, the collapsing of the same, it can all be found in incubi literature. It's just people have never researched it and said, okay, why is it that they try to take on the image? How do they do that? You know,
right?
What's going on? And so it at least makes sense. But I guess that's my contribution to the field, hopefully.
Oh, that's awesome, man. I was going to say, before I start asking you some questions, how many books you got? One? Or do you have two?
1.5. No, I'm just kidding. One and Skin That Crawls is coming out soon, dude. I was
going to say, I'm like, I wanted to start with your work, but since you got one, it's a moment called man, right? That's
and it's not even, people think it's about demonology. No, it's an homage to the religion I grew up in. I lost a good friend to addiction because of church hurt. And so I wrote that a long time ago, and it's,
I'm sorry.
If you can get it.
That's rough, man.
It was, I didn't even know I had addiction until we went out to dinner one night, and out of nowhere, it just comes in, and he was on something, man, and it devastated me because I was out with another friend, and I'm like, who was this guy? Who are you? And so that was a tough time. But yeah, so it was an homage to Brandon Wallace, who good guy, just hurt in different ways. But it's not a book about demonology. But anyway, Skin That Crawls will be a trilogy, and it's going to be, again, the first book is going to be the context for necronetics and building upon that foundation, and then introducing different concepts thereof. I'm also I have a project that I'm going to be working on called Parasymposia. What's happening is there's a lot of people that want to contribute to my research, want to follow it. They want to be mentored by me. And I'm going to be doing that, but it's going to be like kind of my own thing. Does that make sense? My own deal.
Yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah, because, honestly, like I've got books that are hundreds of dollars that I want to buy. And I've been self-financing all this for like 10 years. And I never got in this to be like, hey, somebody wants to do this for you, or somebody wants to follow you. I was like, I don't know. I got some ideas. But now that I'm here, it's and people wanted me to do this. It's like, okay, I'll do it. So I'm excited about that too, brother. Good. One of my dreams is to make the Skin That Crawls into a motion picture and introduce this kind of research to the masses. Because, we had the Conjuring, trilogy series, whatever. We've had other movies. I think that, but once people see this for what it is, especially people in the church, they're going to be like, it's like, there we go, guys. The conversation's being had. So, but anyways,
that's what it was.
Was it?
I think you and I are really similar because we've had very similar backgrounds and like spirituality and beliefs at the core. But the older we've gotten, just through experiences and stuff, where it's like there's more here that the Bible doesn't exactly dive into. And I understand it wasn't meant to, but I'm like, there's a lot more here that I want answers for.
Right.
I never told you this, but when I was younger, my brother got possessed. I don't know well, we know by what, but and I'll spare because it's a long story, but there's one event in particular, and at the time my brother was 21. He's 9 years older than I am, and my dad was a pastor at the time, or at least I think he had gotten like laid off and so. But anyway, my brother was roommating with two other guys, so in their young 20s, and my dad gets a call from one of his roommates, and these are young men, and they're like bawling their eyes out, and they're terrified. There's something wrong with Richard. You gotta get over here. And he's like, what's going on? And they're like, he's in the bathtub. I don't know. He's freaking out. There's something going on. So he goes over there. He goes in the bathroom, and my brother's sitting there in the bathtub. I don't know like what he's doing. And he's not like naked or anything, but he's just, he's sitting there in the bathtub, and he's kind of like just banging his head back and forth. And so my dad, the thing he knew how to do was get on top of him, and he laid his hands on his head and just started praying. And during this time, my brother just started smacking his head on as hard as he can on the wall and just start laughing, and he's trying to hold his head. And as my dad's like praying more intently, a voice just comes out of my brother and says, he's mine. You can't have him. Just stuff like that. And, like that was just a small blip of the entire thing, but, or I should say part of the entire book that is that whole thing. But, it just, the older I got, the more I realized, I think people get really comfortable with just the conventional church thing. Like, oh, I'll kind of just read scripture a little bit, and like, I'll just live the church life. And I'm like, there's so much more happening than just westernized Christianity. Does that make sense? You
Absolutely.
Know what I mean? There's like, I want to matter. Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned, oh gosh,
Heiser,
drawing a blank here. He wrote,
Missler or
Michael Hauser.
Yeah.
Dr. Michael Hauser. Brilliant man. I really enjoy his work, and I know he's one of the several what I consider academic greats. There's many, but he is a great example of where it's like, I want to learn. Like, there's more going on here that we purposely weren't told. Sources like that, when you kind of get into what I would people considered like that work with you and I, Christian fringe research. Because to them, it goes so far in the left field that they're like, well, that just, I can't even. That's the information that I think is important, because if you don't know what this is, you become susceptible.
Right. Just what's been going on here lately is I've been getting emails and followers from the occult, and the occult, and the next thing I know, I'll have a pastor message me. And
interesting.
Oh, it's been incredible. And my dad's a pastor, so I'm like, hey, you got to look at this. This is pretty awesome,
Yeah.
But it's forcing people to have conversations, and a lot of these individuals are a lot like you and I, right? And people need to know that just because we want to understand what's going on doesn't mean we discount what has happened in the past at all. This is very fluid, right? I mean, even the arguments in ufology are the byproducts of the monolithic nature of Western demonology. And here, I always hear, well, these can't be demons because demons don't have bodies. Where'd you get that from? Well, they got that from Western demonology saying that, right? Because they didn't even read incubi literature. It stopped. And I hate to be very transparent with you, so I'm not embarrassed about that. But it's not, they stopped their family Christian bookstore. They didn't pick up T. Whitten Davies and say, hey, listen, oh, by the way, they do have bodies. And so what's going to happen inevitably is when you have a ufologist, they're going to come clashing one day. And it's like, well, they don't even have bodies. And it's like, well, I didn't have anything to say, right? Because they're still stuck in that model. I say that respectfully because I was once there too. But my point here is, yes, I appreciate what they had recorded. Obviously, right? That's what got me here. But the conversation's changing, and I think that's a good foundation to kind of launch off of. But anyways, brother, thank you for having me on, man. I'm totally jealous of the beard. I'm from the Shire, is what I've been told. So,
dude, you look really good, man. You should keep it. I like it a lot.
I'm going to get it like trimmed. I got to get this bad boy trimmed. I feel like I'm eating through like a paintbrush, you know what I mean? Just like trying to shove it in there and hope it gets in, and then it's bad.
It's worse. I don't know if you're a coffee drinker, but it's like worse, when you're sipping and then it just kind of like, hangs out here.
Oh my God.
Or like if you eat anything like yogurt, There's times I've been filming and I look at it and I see like it's, I'm like, oh, that's embarrassing. Or like ribs or something.
Oh, I had ice cream. Okay, it's bad for me because I'm a big chicken wing eater. I love chicken wings, and you know, hot sauce is there, and it's like. And then yesterday I had ice cream, and it was so light I couldn't feel it, but I turned around, looked at it, like I had fangs. I'm like, oh my god, nobody told me that, you know, and so. So I got to get this trimmed up. I want to get the sides kind of faded down. I'm going to keep the length here, but faded. And that's really all I'm going to do. But I'm going to keep it, man. It makes me look like I'm a ship captain or something, you know?
Yeah, it looks, you got like the 1901 look going on. It looks very good. You mentioned OBEs and NDEs in relation to abduction phenomena. What's the potential link there, and how does it change our understanding of consciousness and reality?
Well, we need to understand that the phenomenon, or whatever these beings are, have the ability to induce and create NDEs within us. I'll never forget an account I read in the book Beyond UFOs by Ray Hernandez and a group of researchers. It's a compendium of experiences. Anyways, these love and light entities, of course. There was this gentleman that got into a near fatal accident. I think it was a car accident. And he leaves his body just like everybody else has, most of them, at least in NDEs. He goes into this spaceship kind of thing, and he meets these entities. These entities are like, oh, hey, how are you? He's like, I'm not doing too good. They're like, you're not doing too good. And he's like, well, what was this? And this is crazy. And what was this intelligent electricity that I felt pull me out of my body? It's us. Here you are. And he's like, well, what am I doing here? And they said, well, you have two options. He said, number one, your doctors, your physicians do not have the technology to bring you back together again and put you back in your body and ultimately to save your life. They can't do it. We can. He's like, well, what do you want me to do? And they said, well, there's going to come a time in your life when we want you to say something and we want you to do something, and you're going to have to do it whether you like it or not. And if you do that at the time of our choosing, we'll put you back in your body and you'll continue your life. I have no more room for the love and light narrative in this. Do I believe angels exist? Absolutely. We're not talking about those. Again, it introduces a new category of experience where it obliterates the construct. It's like, well, what are you? And then you get into this kind of this narrative that it's been thrust upon me throughout the years of research, where it's like, oh, well, they were lying. Okay. It's like Ted Rice, is an experiencer. He was abducted. At first, initially, he didn't remember of the abduction. He was just 8 years old, stayed the night at his grandmother's house. In the middle of the night, they both wake up to a disembodied voice speaking to them. And his first memory of that event was him crying because there was a presence in the room that was just, again, absolute terror. And so he goes to his mother, or grandmother rather, and he's like, okay, the next day it was, what was that last night, Grandma? And she's, honey, don't worry about it. That was the devil, but I rebuked him. We're good. So fast forward like 50 years. He does actually Ted Rice. Ted's been creating this psychic movement in the South, where he's got these different groups of psychics, and he's giving people readings. He's trying to help people. He really is. And, but he came to like this conclusion that like he started having PTSD symptoms and he didn't know their origin. He had no idea what was going on. So he contacts Dr. Turner. They connect. They get him connected to Dr. Barbara Bartholic, I think it was, or at least Barbara Bartholic. And they do memory regression. And that's when he just breaks down. He just comes unglued. And they're like, well, can you tell us what happened? He goes, yeah. He goes, that wasn't just a voice. It started as a voice, but my grandmother and I were taken. And in this encounter, there were entities that were trying to do things to him. And he said, don't do it. So then they went to the grandmother. They try to do some things with her as like an incubus. You guys can read into that. And she says, I've only known one man in my life, and he's been dead now for many years. Entity leaves. Here comes the grandpa. Boom. Here I am.
Wow.
So when we're stuck, right, just again, me being very, very transparent, when we're stuck with the commercialized, watered down, what can I pick up at Walmart book to help me out with this phenomenon, it doesn't give us insight into the actual phenomenology. And my biggest fear is that one day when we have the meeting of the minds, religion's going to throw a guy up there who has no idea, has never really had to have these conversations. He may have a degree from some seminary, but he's never actually done this. He's going to throw up the 5 old arguments and the little points. And here you go, they're pint-sized. That always worked on my students. And then another guy's going to come up and say, okay, explain this case study. And they're going to, I don't know what to do. Right. And so it's going to take conversations like we're having to not obliterate our construct, but to inform us on what's actually occurring. And that is invaluable, my friend. That's what I have to say. The whole point of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it is because they're playing by different rules because they're playing a different game. And I think that if anything, what we're starting to look at is the pathology. We've bled through all of the archetypes. We've tested the spirits. We know they're not guides. In times past, now we're starting to realize may not even be ghosts. And if they're not guides or ghosts, they might not even be alien. They might literally just be entities that exist in line with an overarching proto-intelligence. And it seeks to be seen, seeks to be worshipped. And it's the ancient primeval presence that we have always known it to be. And that's really what we're studying. But thank you so much for having me on, my friend. It's always a blast.